Hey guys, it's me Seren back with another video. This video is going to be about the successful protest at the University of Missouri. This has been an ongoing protest for it's been going on for a while, but the results that we've recently seen have been going on for about the last month to the last week. And I'm going to discuss that. But basically, what happened was, as of yesterday morning, the 9th, the president of the University of Missouri, Tim Wolfe, he was forced to step down. And this was in part because of a number of reasons, which included an 8-day hunger strike by a graduate student named Jonathan Butler, a strike by the football team who refused to play, as well as numerous campus-wide protests which were led by a black student group called Concerned Student 1950. So these things all together kind of culminated in the resignation of the university president, as well as the chancellor of the University of Missouri, who I don't believe is actually leaving the school, but is just moving to a different position. So basically the backstory on this is that for years, there have been ongoing complaints at the University of Missouri, and really, if we're being 100% legit, at institutions, colleges, universities, institutions of higher learning all over this country about racism, about racial issues on campus, about racial issues from the students, about systemic issues of racism from the faculty. We saw not just SAE, which was talking about, the racist chants that we saw from the fraternities. So really, systemic racism in higher education is a huge, huge problem. I've discussed it in other videos, but the University of Missouri has really been a different type of thing because we actually saw results. So this civic activism was in response to, like I said, a series of racist occurrences on campus, from students repeatedly being subjected to racial slurs, getting called the N-word, to most recently a swastika made out of feces, aka shit, drawn on a dorm wall. So these incidents were basically met with no type of acknowledgement from the president, from the chancellor, from any of the governing bodies on campus, which led up to Jonathan Butler, the graduate student, basically staging a hunger strike. He said that he was going to stage this hunger strike until either he died or Wolfe was forced to resign, because he said, the racial issues and the racism, they're out of control on this campus, and everyone is just fucking pretending that nothing's going on. If I fucking basically go on this hunger strike and starve myself to death, then y'all will know that this shit is motherfucking real. So he started the hunger strike 8 days ago, and it went on for a week, not a full 7-day week, but a school week, 5 days before the football players at the University of Missouri joined the protest in solidarity. Initially, it was only the black football players on the team, about 30 or so players, but then they ended up getting the support of the coaches, and there wasn't unanimous support from everyone on the team, but they put up a united front. They tweeted out pictures saying, we stand in solidarity with our black players who are refusing to play, they're refusing to practice. You're saying, until Wolfe resigns, until Jonathan Butler eats, until we really see a discussion of the racism on this campus, we're not going to play. So all the millions of dollars that y'all are about to make off of us this season, y'all not about to get it, And like I had said earlier, the campus group called Concerned Student 1950 being the year that black students were first admitted to the University of Missouri. The group, Concerned Student 1950, also began staging a series of protest initiatives in October to kind of really try to bring to light the fact that we have an issue on this campus and the governing bodies need to fucking address it. So they started doing protest actions, and they also drafted a list of 8 demands, which included a formal apology from Wolfe, his immediate removal, both of which they got, mandatory racism awareness and inclusion training, and increased black staff. They have a whole full list of demands. Of course, I'll have a list in the description box. You can read more, so you can find out more about Concerned Student 1950 and read their list of demands. And of course, there'll be links on everything. But basically, you had these 3 things kind of working in tandem. You had the protest movement and the protest action being led by Concerned Student 1950. You had the football players who stood in solidarity and you had Jonathan Butler, who went on the hunger strike. And all of that kind of created this perfect storm of action that led to the president stepping down and the chancellor being removed as well. They also have announced numerous diversity initiatives that are going to be launched at the school, including the hiring of a new diversity officer, in addition to the hiring of a new president, which obviously they will need. So this is a big, 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 big win. This is a huge win. Like I said, you had this perfect storm of different entities kind of working together. It wasn't just, Butler during his hunger strike. It wasn't just the football players. It wasn't just Concerned Student 1950. You had a bunch of different parts, kind of what I talked about in my pro-black, what is pro-black video, where I say pro-black is a bunch of different things working together to achieve common goals. And I feel like that's really what we saw successfully implemented at the University of Missouri. You had, protests on the ground. You had organized protests on the ground. You had unorganized protest from the athletes, so they're hitting, the school where it hurts, aka in their pockets. And then you also have the kind of more radical Jonathan Butler, who said, listen, if I fucking die on this campus, that's going to be on your hands. So they forced the hand of Tim Wolfe. They forced the hand of the president. They played his bluff. That's not the word. They called his bluff, and they won. And that's a huge, huge, huge achievement. But I do want to say, well, before I get into what I want to say, and I feel like, again, like I said in my Being Pro-Black video, this is the way that I feel like we need to operate moving forward, with everybody kind of playing their position, because a lot of the times we do see a lot of people saying, I think my way is right, I think your way is wrong, I think you should do this, I think you should do that, instead of saying, well, we all have our own respective roles to play in the movement. We are all, different machinations in the movement, in the fight for Black liberation. So I think that this is just a really great example of how everybody can play their position, of how everybody can do what they do best, be it hitting them in their pockets where it hurts, like the football players, be it you're on the more radical end, like Jonathan Butler, be it you're on the more organized protest side with drawing up a list of initiatives and, giving a clear, concise end game. Whatever you are best at or, feel like you want to do, I feel like all of us have to work in tandem to move towards Black liberation. And this is just a microcosm because, of course, this is just one school and, one incident and one situation. But I really think this is a good example of how when we all work together in tandem, the things that can be accomplished. So go Missouri. With that being said, I do want to talk about something else really quickly. Well, probably not that quickly, but I do want to talk about something else that has been floating around on social media, more on social media than on mainstream media, but I probably expect it to hit mainstream media a bit more within the next few days. There's been a conversation happening about the role of media and journalism, and especially mainstream media, in protest work. And the reason behind that is because a video appeared online showing protesters at the University of Missouri asking journalists to leave. And eventually a shoving match breaks out between a student journalist and other protesters. I believe a university professor got involved, and mainstream media immediately leapt to the defense of the student journalist and circulated the footage, basically crying outrage about protesters that don't want media at their protests. And a lot of people felt like it was extremely inappropriate. It was extremely condescending. You had a lot of journalists that kind of had this voice of, someone like some major journalist, I don't know who he was, but he had a check mark, tweeted like, not wanting the media at your protest is like biting the hand that feeds you. And a lot of people felt like, what? Like, we don't do protests for the media. Like, we do protests and we do our work because we're fighting for Black liberation. Like, this is not a fucking show that we're putting on for the media, And I just find it really funny. I find a couple of things funny. One, I find it's really ironic that this issue has become centered on the media, and not the racial attitude on campus. You have a lot of journalists that they haven't said not 2 words on Twitter or anything else about the racial attitude on campus at the University of Missouri. They haven't said 2 words about systemic racism in higher education as a whole. They haven't said 2 words about none of that. But they will talk to you all day about how the media has a right to be there and the protesters need the media. Otherwise, what they're doing doesn't mean anything. And I just feel like it's really ironic because centering the issue on the media instead of the real issue proves protesters' point. And their point is that the media doesn't belong in their space because they subvert the message. We don't want you in our protest space because you're going to subvert our message. You're going to change our message to fit your agenda. And that's basically exactly what we're seeing unfold. We're seeing them move the narrative away from a dialogue about systemic racism in higher education and move it towards First Amendment rights and the treatment of the media. You're subverting the message. You're proving their point, And there's also all this talk about, the press having a job to do, and the press has a job to do, and you need to let the press do their job. And it's so funny to me because it's like, people love talking about how the press has a job to do, but nobody wants to talk about how 9 times out of 10, the press does not do their fucking job. Everybody wants to say, oh, the press has a job to do, but nobody wants to mention how the press doesn't do their fucking job. Like, that shit is really funny to me. Like, that shit is really hilarious to me. Like, everybody wants to talk about let the press do their job, but there's no mention of the fact that the press utilizes proven racial biases. There's no mention of the proven racial biases generally held by the media. There's no mention of the twisted and warped narratives that they perpetuate, especially against young Black people. There's no mention of that. Instead, you have these journalists that are just like blah, 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 blathering on and whining and complaining about, it's our First Amendment rights, it's our freedom of speech, it's our right of space laws, and it's like, okay, well, but like, what about personal space laws? Because a lot of the students in the video had said, I don't want my picture taken. Please don't take my picture. I don't want to talk to you. And the journalists have this real sense of entitlement, like, since they're the press, they can just elbow their way into this space, and you have to give them a quote, and you have to let them take your picture. And it's very much like a vulture, like vultures circling around prey. They're doing whatever they got to do to get this story to sell a story off of your Black struggle, and a lot of Black people are not feeling that shit anymore. So it's just like, what about my personal space? What about the right to ask someone to not take your fucking picture? What about the media's inability over the past 15 months to represent protesters in a fair and unbiased light? What about their fucking demonization of protest movements and their use of coded terms like thugs and animals to describe protesters? What about that? I haven't seen hardly any of these complaining ass journalists that are talking about how they have a right to be there to do a job, talking about the fact that most of these journalists are not doing their job. They're using the media to fucking portray a twisted, warped image of Black protesters, and protesters have a genuine and reasonable mistrust of the media at this point. Black people have a genuine and reasonable mistrust of the media at this point, just like we have a pretty genuine and reasonable mistrust of cops at this point. Just like we have a pretty genuine and reasonable mistrust of white people at this point. And none of these journalists want to mention that. They just want to act like the mean Black protesters, kick them out, and they don't understand why, and we need them, and we're so fucking mean. Like, they're completely oblivious to the fact that people don't want them there because they feel like you're not going to do your job, you're not going to give a fair and unbiased report, I don't want to talk to you and then read some shit in the paper tomorrow when my words all twisted up. There's no mention of that. There's no mention of that. They're just completely oblivious. They just really feel like they have the right to come in a space and say and do whatever they want, And it's just like, journalists really have this tendency, and you guys know that, like, I have a journalism degree. Like, I used to be a journalist, so I know. It's like, journalists have this tendency to make situations worse, not better. Like, just like cops, Fair and unbiased reporting seems to have died with the fucking Stone Age. And many of these journalists just come across like privileged, like spoiled fucking crybabies that will do anything for a story, including violating people's personal rights. Like, I was talking to people on Twitter journalists on Twitter last night that were just like completely 100% like not getting it. They're talking about like, oh, like what is the point of a protest? A point of a protest is not education and inclusion. Someone like literally asked me that, some white lady journalist, talking about, oh, the point of a protest should be education and inclusion. I'm like, that's not the point of a protest. The point of protest movement is to enact change. It's not to educate you. It's not to include you. It's not to give you a soundbite. It's not to give you a quote. It's not to give you a nice picture. It's not to give you a story that you could sell. It's not to get you a Pulitzer Prize. Like, the point of protest work is to enact change. And the point of our protest work that we're doing now is Black liberation. Like, I don't even know what you're talking about, fucking white girl. What are you talking about, you know? And it's just really a trip to, like, witness in real time journalists like really exposing themselves, you know? And that's not to say that I don't appreciate a good piece of journalism, because you guys know that I do. Like, I fill my description box with links from a lot of really great different places, but it's like, at this point, I myself don't even trust mainstream media. Like, I tell y'all all the time, mainstream media ain't shit. Like, read around and like get different points of view, because every story has spin on it. Every story is coming from somebody's, you know, point of view. Hardly anything is fair and unbiased. I have tons of mainstream media outlets, like, legit blocked on my computer, on Twitter. Like, I have the Daily Beast blocked. I feel like the Daily Beast is, like, very clickbait. Like, a lot of their shit is clickbait. The Hollywood Reporter, like, and then there's places where even if you trust the writers, the comment sections are so terrible, you know? Like, mainstream media is falling apart. And it's really interesting to watch these journalists sit back and act like it's not happening, and act like they don't understand why people, Black people, protesters, you know, don't trust them. They don't understand. They just want to throw their hands up and say, we're the media, you know? Let us into your space because we're the media. The media, like, you just being the media does not have the power that it used to have, you know? And it's like, it sucks because, like I said, like, I appreciate a good piece of journalism, like fair, really truly fair and unbiased reporting provides a media consumer like myself, you know, fair and unbiased reporting that provides us with all the facts is like a rare gem. Like, in my Racial Dolezal video, I literally said, like, you know, the people in, where the fuck was she from? Now I can't even remember. Wherever she was. Where was she from? Dang, y'all, I can't remember. Spokane. I said, like, you know, the local paper in Spokane did an excellent job. They did a great piece of journalism, you know? Like, good journalism is an important part of the spread of information on current events. Like, I'm not going to say that it's not. But that doesn't negate the fact that mainstream media has seriously dropped the ball on reporting, especially when it comes to reporting on civil unrest, especially when it comes to reporting on protest, especially when it comes to reporting on racial tensions, especially when it comes to reporting on racism against Black bodies. You know, they have dropped the ball, and people have a reasonable fear and mistrust of them, and they act like they don't understand that, you know? And it's like, the conversation that we should be having is not about your First Amendment rights to report on a story. The conversation that we should be having, aside from the one about systemic racism in higher education, the conversation that we should be having is about the reasonable fear and mistrust that people have of journalists. The conversation that we should be having is not about your First Amendment rights to tell a story. The conversation that we should be having is about the reasonable fear and mistrust that people have of journalists, especially, marginalized groups that have consistently seen a negative narrative of themselves pushed in the media, especially us. Instead of whining about how fucking the mean Black protesters don't want you there and how they're biting the hand that feeds them, because what the fuck is that? Why don't you ask them why they don't want you there? You don't want me here? Oh, why not? What do you think, you know, what do you think is going to happen? Oh, I think you're going to twist my words up in this, and this. Oh, how about this? I won't even record our conversation. Everything you tell me is off the record. You know, like, you're supposed to work with people. Like, why don't you try to understand why they don't believe you have their best interests at heart? When they say, like, give us a moment of privacy, instead of stamping your feet and screaming about First Amendment rights, which was, like, literally what this student journalist did in the video. He screamed, like, I have my First Amendment right to be here. Like, people are fucking hurting. Like, people woke up to see fucking racial slurs and swastikas and shit on their fucking wall. Like, people are going through some shit. And you come in and screaming about how they have to fucking let you put a fucking camera and a microphone in their face makes you sound like an entitled, petulant child. Like, why don't you say you'll wait until they're ready to talk? Like, oh, we don't want to talk to the media right now. Like, we want our privacy or something. You know, okay, well, we'll wait. We'll be right over here or right over there or right wherever, you know. Like, journalism is about creating relationships and earning respect, not demanding fucking sound bites and interviews, you know? And I feel like I've learned some pretty good journalism, and I've learned from some very good journalists, and it's just really disheartening. It is to, like, see the way that these people fucking act, you know? Like, journalism is not about that. Journalism is really supposed to be about creating relationships and earning respect, and protest work is about uniting for a common cause, not creating like these elaborate stage productions for the media to report on, which a lot of people seem to think is the case. A lot of people seem to think that that's what we do. Like, and in the age of the internet, mainstream media isn't even necessary for protesters to get their voices heard. Like, they can get on social media or new media. A lot of people are saying new media. They can Vine, they can Snapchat, they can Instagram, they can YouTube, they can Facebook, you know, they can live stream, which was how the vast majority of us saw what was going on in Ferguson and in Baltimore. You know, this idea that protesters and you know, people embroiled in certain types of protest work and war zones and, you know, things like that, that they need reporters. They need us to be their voice. They need us to speak for them. And the sense of entitlement that comes with that is an outdated concept. And it's very like white ally, you need me to get your black ass voices heard. And if you don't do what I want when I want, I'm taking my toys out the sandbox and bitch, I'm going home. And it's just like, well, take your little toys out the sandbox. Like, we have our own. We have our own toys. We can present our own narrative. We can control our own narrative. We don't need you. We don't need you. Like, media is not necessary for protests to happen. Media is not necessary for change to be enacted, especially when mainstream media only wants to paint a picture of protests as hate groups or thugs and animals, you know? It's like a lot of media are working in this, again, this kind of outdated model, like the way that they did the civil rights movement, which was, you know, we need to get attacked by dogs and cops on TV so that people all across the world can see this and feel for us. We don't have to do that anymore. We don't have to do that anymore. We're creating our own new media in real time. You know, mainstream media, old media is reactionary. Like, things have to happen before they can even spring into action. And it's just really like fucked up and condescending to assume and imply that protesters like need you, you know, that protesters need mainstream media for their goals to be effective. Like, we don't need you. We're not protesting for you. We don't need you at our protests. Like, instead of crying about your First Amendment right to be there, how about you ask why people don't want you there and work on repairing your broken trust with marginalized groups? Like, the journalists are handling this shit all wrong, and that is why they're getting left in the dust by the new media, you know? Like, protesters don't need you anymore. We don't need you. We don't need you. We do not need you. We don't need you for our goals to be effective. Look at the University of Missouri, you know? People saying like, oh, well, they needed the media for this to be effective. No, they didn't. That shit was done as soon as the football players said they're not going to play anymore. They wouldn't let that shit stretch out for a whole season. That would be millions of dollars. Money talks and bullshit walks. Like, y'all know that I always say this, you know? Like, you had organized protesters working in tandem with radicals that were doing a hunger strike, working in tandem with the money, aka the talent, aka the student athletes who recognized their worth and their value to the school and pulled those resources off of the table. Like, if we're being really real, the football team strike, which will affect the income for the school for the entire year, is much more important than any media coverage, you know? Like, the football players utilize their privilege as student athletes who greatly impact the budget of the school. They called the bluff of the president, and they won. They stood up to the school, and they won. That has nothing to do with the media. Nothing. That has to do with, again, everybody playing their position, everybody doing what they needed to do to present a united front to the school to say, listen, we're going to hit you here, 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 and we're going to hit you there. And we're getting this person to fucking resign. And we're getting these fucking new race initiatives. And we're getting this, and we're getting that, you know? And they got it done. And they got it done. They got it done. And I really wish more professional athletes and other collegiate players and, you know, other people in general that have the power to hit our white supremacist system in their pockets, which really is all of us collectively, which is why I talk about, you know, cooperative economics and things like that, would realize the power that we have in our talents and in our bodies and in our money to enact change. Because as you can see, when we all fucking play our position and work together, change can happen, regardless of if the motherfucking media is there or not, you know. But that's a video for another day. So congratulations to everyone that participated in the Missouri protests, especially Jonathan Butler, who kind of got the whole thing going with his hunger strike. The football players who put their money where their mouths were. Concerned Student 1950, which already had a list of demands ready to go. Like, everybody worked together and said, we're going to get this shit done. And it was just really, really, really nice to see. And again, it's really interesting to also see the media try to kind of subvert their message into some, we have to be there for this to matter. No, you don't, bitch. We don't need you anymore. So that's it. Check out the links in the description box. Food for thought as always. See you guys next time. Peace.